Huh? Talk to the method for
Welcome to our English Speaking Union Happy Hour, a celebration of World Poetry Day with the Wick's Poetry Center Traveling Stanzas with David Hassler. Today's Happy Hour is sponsored by the Cleveland branch of the ESU who arranged this program. As ideas for these lectures come from you, our members and viewers, please share any ideas or topics for an upcoming speaker or talk using the survey that will appear at the end of our program tonight. Before we get into that program, I wanted to make a quick couple of technical announcements. After the presentation, we will be holding a question and answer session. You can enter your questions for this question and answer session into the Q&A module or the chat module, both of which are located at the buttons to which are located at the bottoms of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation. It doesn't have to be during the Q&A portion. We will get to questions in the order received and we will only go 15 minutes over the allotted time for questions, just so everyone's aware. I also want to take a moment to recognize the branches with the most registered members. So Central Florida branch, the Charlottesville branch, and the Seattle branch. Now to start us off today, I'd like to welcome the president of the ESU Cleveland branch, Bill Kennedy. Bill?
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, and welcome everyone from the Cleveland branch. It is happy hour, so please prepare your cocktail. As our perennial potation for poets, a finger or two of good whiskey, in this case, writer's tears. They found something to do with all of those writer's tears. A little bit of water, and you're good to go. I'll be offering a toast shortly. Every branch, every city has a poetry scene. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with your local poetry scene. If you're not, you can become familiar with your local poetry scene. We're lucky here in Northern Ohio to have had a poetry scene that was very active in the Cleveland area. Very often they're associated with universities, sometimes with independent bookstores, sometimes with bars or other venues. In Cleveland, the Cleveland Poetry Center was very active with regular readings, and also Max Back's Paperbacks in Cleveland and the Barking Spider Tavern in Cleveland sponsored many regular readings. In Kent, where I was a student for a while, beginning in the 60s at Shelley's bookstore in Kent, and then Shelley's Press, which published a lot of local poets. And then moving on to the Captain Brady's and Brady's Cafe years, and now with Last Exit Bookstore in Kent, regular Zoom poetry readings have been going on this year. And every spring in May, there's been, the first weekend in May, there's been a Jawbone Open Poetry Weekend, which will happen again this year in the first weekend in May. And that we hope will be a live event this year because we'll all be able to be outside, masked and unmasked. Why poetry? Well, we're celebrating on March 21st, World Poetry Day, which was instituted by UNESCO back in 1999. And this is also coming up on April, which is National Poetry Month. And this will be the 25th anniversary of National Poetry Month. It was started in 1996. In Kent, Ohio, as I said, we're lucky to have also had the Wick Poetry Center, begun in 1984 by two brothers in memory and honor of their sons, Tom and Bob Wick. And beginning with Maggie Anderson as the director, and David Hassler has been the director of the Wick Poetry Center since 2000. And it sort of bridges the gap between academia and community poets. Sometimes there's been some conflict between the two, but the Wick Poetry Center manages to bring all poets together for events and other things, both nationally, internationally, online, and offline. So I would just like to begin by offering a toast to celebrate World Poetry Day, National Poetry Month, to all of the poets I've had the pleasure of learning from and reading with, in particular poets who are no longer with us, Madge Reagan in Kent, Ginny Dunn, Henry Green, Steve Melton, Daniel Thompson here in Cleveland, and all of the many other poets around the country. If you don't know where your poetry scene is, look for it, you'll find it. If you're lucky enough to be in Chicago, you can go to the Green Mill. In DC, you can go to Poets and Waiters. There are a variety of places. And in Cleveland, come to the Wick Poetry Center or to the Last Exit Bookstore for the regular readings. David Hassler, Sláinte.
Thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be speaking with you here for the English Speaking Union. I'm going to do a screen share to put on PowerPoint. I'm thrilled to talk with you about a program that we developed here at the Wick Poetry Center. I took over as director in 2009. Maggie Anderson, our founding director, was my mentor and professor, in fact. And in 2000, she hired me to develop an outreach component to the program. And in 2009, we created a Traveling Stanzas community arts project, which I'll be talking about in this sort of wide-ranging talk, and sharing some poems and sharing some videos from our work, and then asking you all to share your voice. I want to begin with a beautiful poem by a fifth grade student in our community, Fatu Mbaye. Much of the work, as Bill said, that we do at the Wick Poetry Center is to bridge town and gown and to bring poetry to people's everyday lives and to engage Kent State students in teaching poetry in schools, with veterans groups, senior centers, hospitals, and to treat poetry as truly a way to engage people in a deeper conversation, to slow down and reflect on their lives. Naomi Shihab Nye, a beloved poet, truly a global ambassador for poetry, says that poetry is a conversation with the world, a conversation with words on the page in which you allow those words to speak back to you, and a conversation with yourself. Fifth grader Fatu Mbaye wrote this poem in conversation with her favorite tree, a large maple in her schoolyard. And I'd like to begin by reading her poem. Tree, you put the spark back in my body. Let me just make sure that this advances. There we go. I'll start again. Tree, you put the spark back in my body. And when I take a breath, the lights behind my eyes are turned on and the fire in my furnace crackles. The whole world stops buzzing. For once, the earth will have a chance to think and remember why we're here. On that day, I'll look at you, tree, through your leaves, your bark, your sapwood, all the way to your heart, your beating, beating heart, and say, thank you. Fatu found words to pay homage to this tree inspired by an E.E. Cummings poem, whose first lines begin, and many of you will know this poem, I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, and a blue, true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. So her poem continues that conversation with E.E. Cummings, with the words on the page that came before her. Poet Donald Hall, in a 1993 essay, The Unsayable Said, writes that poetry is the unsayable said. Talk altered into art, speech slowed down and attended to. words arranged for the reader who contracts to read them for their whole heft of association. Through poetry, we believe at the Wick Poetry Center that we all can say what feels unsayable in our lives, to honor and make meaning of what we love and of what we have lost. And when we rub words together in a new combinations, we can put the spark back in our bodies and resonate with others. Well, my father taught for 48 years in the English department here at Kent State. I was, yes, a faculty brat and determined not to find my way into academia. That didn't turn out quite that way. And my brother, my father's main study of research was science fiction. My brother, my older brother, has become a solar physicist. And always as children, he was the scientist. I was the dreamer who loved words and music and acting. And I remember leaning over his shoulder many times as he peered through his telescope at the sky, earnest and very determined to know what was up there. I like to think of my brother and I as the two halves of my father's brain, the science and the fiction, though we're all united in our shared passion to see the world in new ways. Jane Hirschfield, pictured here, a wonderful California poet, environmental spokesperson, started an idea and reached out to me in 2017 called Poets for Science, a project and now a traveling exhibit that we first took to the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for the original March for Science. And she says, poetry and science are not opposites, but allies. And that observation and imagination, the microscope and the metaphor, are both instruments of discovery. So only now do I find my way back into sharing some of the passion that my father and brother shared in their science fiction novels and in their love of science. And I've been studying a little bit about sympathetic resonance, a beautiful term, which is a scientific term. In the subatomic world, new particles are formed only when energy is sparked by the collision of an electron and a proton, and it keeps feeding back on itself, resonating like a bell that is struck and continues to ring. Physicists who search for these new particles call what they are doing resonance hunting. From the Latin being a word nerd, at Wick, we actually have t-shirts that say word nerd. We love looking into the etymology and the origins of words. Well, the word to resonate from Latin, resonare, means literally return the sound. When we strike a tuning fork, another tuning fork of the same size and shape, if held close, will begin to vibrate, a phenomenon that scientists call sympathetic resonance. I believe that poetry can create this healing sympathetic resonance between people, between self and world, between Fatu and her beautiful maple tree. Our bodies are in fact tuning forks, vibrating to the language of a poem and to each other. Well, my work began just out of my MFA program at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, where I was so fortunate to be offered a job as a poet in the schools for the Ohio Arts Council. Not really prepared to know what I was doing exactly. I remember my very first day walking into a 5th grade classroom at St. Sebastian School in Akron, Ohio. And I confess I had no lesson plan. What I had was pockets of poems. I had stories I wanted to tell about a year that I lived in Tokyo, Japan, teaching English, supporting myself, a transformative year that actually began to wake me up to my own writing and to my ability to make meaning of my life. And I read poems to this 5th grade class, one in particular called Eating Soba, about my little ritual, going to soba shops on the corners of streets in Tokyo and slurping the hot bowl of buckwheat noodles and discovering that in fact, slurping was considered a compliment to the chef. And I told that class, though I couldn't speak Japanese very well, I was an excellent slurper and felt fluent in Japanese when I was eating my soba. I also said that when I ordered my soba, I learned I could order a full moon soba, which was the name they had for asking for an egg, a raw egg, to be dropped into the center of your bowl, into the hot broth. They call it tsukimi soba. And I said to the fifth graders, this is my first time teaching, I said, can you believe what beautiful expression and metaphor in the language, in the Japanese language? And one fifth grade girl raised her hand very nonchalantly, as if to school me. And she said, well, you know, that's not surprising. In our country, we order our eggs sunny side up. And what struck me then was how I had been tone deaf and unaware of the metaphor in my own idiomatic expression of my own mother tongue. That little aha moment sparked, after I read my poem, an incredible class poem, which I have to say, there was a sound of slurping as I read my poem, Eating Soba. And after I finished, one boy raised his hand and triggered the whole class, sparked a way for them to be in conversation with my poems. So I'm going to read you a poem I wrote that tells the story of that day, and it's called Reaching to a Sky of Soba. I walked past winter boots lined up in rows through the door, Miss Brown's 10 o'clock 5A English. My first day teaching poetry in the schools, the students crowd around. They want to know how tall I am and if my hair is real. A stranger in the room, I stand near a small stool they call the author's chair. Snow falls outside beyond windows dressed with pilgrim hats and turkeys. Reading my poem, Eating Soba, I say poetry lets you talk to things you don't normally talk to, and here I'm talking to noodles as though my bowl were a smiling friend. In Japan, you can slurp as loud as you want. The louder, the greater the compliment to the chef. The class practices slurping. One boy asks, could you say the sky is a bowl of soba? I smile, yes. Then the sun is a raw egg floating in it. Another hand appears. Trees are chopsticks. Heads turn to look out the windows, and clouds or steam rising above. The students gasp and applaud. Planets are onions. The moon is a bump at the bottom of the bowl. Earthquakes break up the noodles. Their rumbling is slurping. Our mouths are black holes breathing it in. God is the chef. Meteors are coins we throw down to pay. Then the shy boy looking at the floor raises his hand. The universe is a giant bowl of soba. We keep eating and eating until the last explosion. When the universe ends, he says, our bowl is empty. The bell rings, their hands still reaching in the air. Well, that felt to me like new particles were created in that classroom. It was the Big Bang. It was incredible. And the teacher said, you won't believe what just happened. And I said, I don't. And she said, the boy who started the poem by asking permission, asking the question, could you say the sky is a bowl of soba, is a boy that in November that had not spoken in that class, had not raised his hand. He had not found a voice, something that would spark his own participation. And that boy was the same boy who ended the poem with that incredible image that the universe was a giant bowl of soba, and that when the universe ends, our bowl is empty. Well, as a visiting poet in classrooms now for 20 years since then, continuing, I see repeatedly this healing power of poetry to spark a sympathetic resonance precisely with those students or those adults in community groups who are struggling emotionally or academically, or felt they have not yet found a voice. Building off this experience as a poet in the schools, Maggie Anderson brought me into the Wick Poetry Center, initially in 2000, to develop an outreach program. And in 2009, Kent State Visual Communications Design professor Valora Reneker got in touch with me and asked to collaborate with her students to create illustrations in the community in response to poems that we curate from our outreach. This mission of Traveling Stanzas, a name that we came up with, is simple: to bring poetry to everyday lives so that we can encounter a poem where we might not expect to find it, to resonate with the voices in our own community. As Mage Reagan often said in our Kent community of poets, that poets are the means by which a place comes to know itself. So we've wrapped these designs of poems around metal utility boxes, in kiosks, on murals, in lobbies. They've traveled as posters on the Cleveland RTA system and the Akron Metro buses. And more recently, we've created digital e-cards and platforms in which you can share them online. Again, as a word nerd, the word stanza means a section of a poem in our English usage, but its origin comes from Italian, and it means literally a small room, often a waiting room in a train station. So we like to think of our traveling stanzas throughout the community as offering people a moment of pause, a little pocket of time to slow down and reflect on their lives. Well, in our work in the community, we've developed some new methods and new digital creative writing tools that have always begun as analog. And I want to talk a little bit about a method we created using what we now call spark cards. Initially, on the internet, we purchased English language flashcards, nouns, adjectives, and verbs, and brought them into community workshops, asking people to move them around, to draw cards, to deal a card to another, as they began to play with language and to find new ways to spark, to rub words together in new combinations, like Desmond Tucker does here in his beautiful poem, My Soul. And I'd like to play, we began creating short videos of participants. And so I'm going to play Desmond Tucker, not only reading his poem, but talking about how these cards have sparked his imagination.
When I'm writing, I can just spill everything. Like on Thursdays, I'm so stressed and like tired from school. And then the poem class helps me just get calm and just write, basically. That's my favorite subject, writing. I just pick a random card and I close my eyes, I look away, and then I just pick a random card, and then whatever that card is, I just put it in my poem. I looked at the cards and I grabbed one, and then it was sock. And so I said the white sock in a dryer full of colored socks. My soul. My soul is a white sock in a dryer, surrounded by everyone else's colored socks. My soul is different. My soul is a bird that fell out of the nest. My soul wants to explore. Maybe I should let it go and fly away.
So we had great success using these spark cards and finding a way, and I think it brings home this feeling of play, of heightened play, which is at the root of all of our art making, and certainly of poetry, a play with language. In 2017, we received a major grant from the Knight Foundation to build a project and to offer writing workshops with refugees and immigrants, partnering with the International Institute of Akron, a resettlement agency, and to bring poetry writing workshops into English language learning classes, and to use these Spark cards with our participants from all over the world to help them make meaning of their own lives and to connect this new language of English to in an emotional, meaningful way to the life that they were living, and to learn English at the same time. And several of the participants said, you know, these learning English through making these simple metaphors and making these short poems is much more effective than the lessons, following the repetitions and the lessons of our language classes. So I want to play a beautiful video by Ellie Musavi, who talks about her life and reads her beautiful poem "My Voice" and remembers her mother. And this we built this exhibit with posters and interactive videos and places where visitors could share their own voice in a traveling exhibit called Writing Across Borders. This is Ellie.
I am Ellie, and I was as a refugee in Turkey for about more than 3 years. But after that, I arrived here in Akron, Ohio. When I want to speak about my voice, I can say if I use that, if I singing with my voice, I think I can open more doors to the another world. I think my voice is as my mother's voice, and when I was child, always she singing for us. When I singing, I feel my mother, she is singing now, so I love it. توی یک دیوار سنگی دو تا پنجره اسیرم دو تا خسته. This is my poem, My Voice. My voice is a boat that brought me across a big sea. My voice is a crab that holds me as a child sleeps in her mother's skirt. My voice is a shiny sea where I swim into my real dream. My voice is a rope with strong knots that tie me to my past. My voice is a key that opens a door to a bigger world.
When we recorded that interview with Ellie, I was asking her questions sitting with our teleproduction students who did these beautiful videos for us from our campus. I felt a deep sympathetic resonance with her story, with her voice, with her poem, with her evoking her mother, and it was very emotional. She didn't know when we'd be able to return to see her mother. And as poetry can do in this ongoing conversation from one life to another, or as Leon Lee says, poems are the inner voice of one person speaking to the inner voice of another. It makes me think of how I felt hurt and pushed into poetry in my mid-20s by an overwhelming need that I felt personally to make meaning of a grief and the loss of my mother when I was 12. It's remarkable to me when I woke up sort of in my mid-20s and realized I hadn't spoken about my mother, and certainly not to her, that I felt I had no voice to do so until I discovered in poetry this ability and read the poems of others. And Maggie Anderson, my mentor, has many beautiful poems about her mother who died when she was 9. And we used to joke with each other that we were the founding members of the Dead Mother Club. So when I first started writing poems, I wrote directly to my mother and felt that in doing so, I was reclaiming my relationship to her. And one of the very first poems I wrote was called Long Walk Home, beginning with the lines, "Mother, I was late for your death, but I know you have forgiven me." So I wrote as a way to be in conversation with her and to resonate with my memory of her, to feel, to say what felt truly unsayable up until that point in my life. She was my reader, my listener. I believe she heard me into speech. And I felt that divine communion, that return to sound, that resonare, that has a deeply healing power. Robert Bly talks in his book, Iron John, he says, where a man's wound is, that is where his genius will be. Wherever the wound appears in our psyches, that is precisely the place for which we will give our major gift to the community. So I've learned over the years to speak through my own wound in order to help others find a voice for their own lives. And indeed, in 2000, created a program called Giving Voice, in which we would celebrate our outreach participants, beginning with third graders and going all the way up to seniors in our community. Perhaps grief work is, in fact, one of the most important tasks we have right now as a culture dealing with what feels an overwhelming climate crisis, what feels the precarious dissolution of democracy, of civility, racial injustice, environmental injustice. And here at Kent State, I grew up in this town that has its own wound. And I think Kent State as an institution, there's so many talented and creative and wonderful people on this campus, both faculty and students and staff, that we can become wounded healers for others. And the 1970 shootings at Kent State was a trauma that did not for many years have a voice. Somehow, all through my public school years, graduating from Kent Roosevelt High School in 1982, our history professors and sociology teachers never found the time to teach the May 4th, 1970 shootings, in which 4 students were killed, 9 students wounded by Ohio National Guard in an peaceful anti-war protest. So at the Wick Poetry Center, our founding director, Maggie Anderson, for the 30th anniversary in 1990, created, and Bill participated as so many poets in our community that helped to organize it alongside Maggie, a gathering of poets. I, as a student, participated in that gathering, that marking of 20 years of this wound through poetry. When I, in 2010, for the 40th anniversary, working at Wick, I scripted a play called May 4th Voices, building and weaving the voices from the oral history archives. And for the 50th anniversary, just recently in 2020, for the Wick Poetry Center created a traveling exhibit called Armed with Our Voices, in collaboration with the May 4th Visitors Center. So I'd like us now, another project that we rolled out in 2020 in honor and in commemoration of our own wound here is a global peace poem. And this is lovely to discover how popular and active this became. It was a digital way to share your voice on this website. We have received nearly 1,000 contributions from every continent, from probably 30 different countries and from all over the US. And it's a very simple process, which I can just take you through briefly. You simply can click respond. You can go to globalpeacepoem.com, and Joshua could put that in the chat. Click get started, then read the model poem that we wrote at Wick. Click continue and choose which prompt you'd like to answer. And once you choose a prompt, it gives you a little more prompting questions, and then you can type in whatever your thought, your leaping thought, your metaphor is. And when you click submit, it gets emailed to you and to the online gallery. And I invite all of you now, in honor of the 100-year anniversary of the English Speaking Union, to share your voice, to share it in honor of your mission. And I know from reading that Sir Evelyn Wrench, 102 years ago, just after the First World War, created this idea of the English-speaking union in response to the war and for a desire to preserve peace. So you may do that at any point now. I know I just have a little bit longer to go with this presentation. I want to share with you a beautiful quote from Parker J. Palmer, wonderful educator, and a great advocate for poetry. And he says that poems can help offer us a way to think the world together, where our hearts, he says, can break open to each other and not apart. What many call the politics of rage, Palmer calls the politics of the broken-hearted. And it is there in the break, it is there, he points out, where we can find a small patch of common ground beneath politics. Often he calls the heart a pre-political organ. It is there where we can hear voices of the other and engage and begin to engage in a conversation where we are sharing a similar forms of grief. So our newest project here at the Wick Poetry Center is something we're very excited about and literally has not been publicly announced yet. And it's called Global Vaccine Poem, Dear Vaccine. We're launching this project in collaboration with the University of Arizona Poetry Center. And we see it as another important effort at creative healing, a chance to harness the imaginative language of poetry with science to address this global health crisis. And we asked Naomi Shihab-Nye to write the model poem entitled Dear Vaccine, to charge the air, and then built 4 prompts based on her poems, in which, just like the Global Peace poem, after reading Naomi's poem, visitors to the site can click which prompt they want to answer. And we've already received over 200 contributions, though it's only been live for about 6 days. And we plan to launch it publicly April 5th and 6th. Our hope is to find new stakeholders to expand this project, to print more physical postcards with postal addresses and prompt questions that can be filled out during that 15-minute waiting period after your vaccine and mailed to either the Wick Poetry Center or Tucson, and or to invite visitors to go on their phone and to share digitally online. So ultimately, poetry is this tool. It's a birthright that we all have, and it's a universal language to transform our shared human experiences into both a powerful personal and a powerful collective meaning. Poetry encourages, which again, its etymology means literally to give heart, and does what the German poet Rilke called heart work. In his poem, The Turning Point, translated by Stephen Mitchell, he writes, "Work of the eyes is done now. Go and do heart work on all the images imprisoned within you." So long as we continue to be open and to play with language, we're never too old or too young for poetry. We can all be resonance hunters, finding new particles of meaning that ring true when we rub words together and create a spark and make the unsayable said. This creative healing is the real heart work of poetry, and it's how, if we're lucky, we can think the world together, not apart. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I just want to now invite anyone, if you have any questions, please enter them into either the Q&A and chat section. And thank you again, David, for that wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. Let me just see. So we don't have any questions yet, but I would like to remind everyone that there is the link in the chat that you can click on to go to the Global Peace poem and submit, even during the Q&A section if you would like, a line or two for that Global Peace poem. We do have someone who has submitted, but I believe it's just a note of thanks from Brian Gordon saying, "David, that was truly beautiful."
Thank you. And I'm happy to hear not just questions, but comments or any way that others would like to share their voice. I'm happy that I didn't go over my time. It's 5:46.
So our first question really is from Loveday Conquest of our Seattle branch, who asks, "Are there many poetry writing classes in prisons?"
It's a great question, and fortunately there is there's quite a lot of organizations around the country offering writing workshops in prisons. I know in Arizona there's a very robust program. In the Phoenix area, we're part of what's called the National Poetry Coalition. It's 25 organizations around the country sharing best practices, collaborating, coordinating programs led by the Academy of American Poets. And I know quite a few of our orgs in that coalition offer writing workshops in prisons. We have been offering workshops in our juvenile detention center in Akron, Ohio, as part of a graduate level class called The Writer in the Community with the Summit County Juvenile Detention Center.
So our next question is also from Brian Gordon, who asks, do you think about poems about gun control or gun violence, or is that, sorry, let me start that over. Did you think about poems about gun violence or gun control, or is that too political for your organization? There can be such power in poetry for social change.
We're all about pushing that envelope and trying to see how far we can move people to have that Goldilocks effect of into some new space of a conversation, a challenge, a slight discomfort, to have a meaningful conversation that has the potential to change minds and hearts. And it's a dance, it's a balance. Again, Parker J. Palmer addresses that in his newest book, Healing the Heart of Democracy. Like, what do you do in a culture that's so divided, that feel like I can't hear you and you can't hear me? Where do we find what he calls that small patch of common ground initially to stand? And often he says that is in acknowledging a shared grief that is often the pre-political, long before we make policy decisions and political pronouncements. We have a kind of acknowledgement of an emotional truth of being human and of the complexity and confusion and fear that we all feel. And I think when I worked with the play, May 4th Voices and the oral histories, it really felt very visceral to me that hearing the oral history after the fact, listening to and reading the transcripts of National Guardsmen, of protesting students, of townspeople, and discovering that often they were saying they were sharing in their story a similar fear and confusion and utter perplexity, but would not have been able to talk to one another at that time and in that space. And through the sleight of hand of the play and of staging it on stage, and I'm thrilled that Bill Kennedy was in one of the productions in Cleveland along with Mage Reagan, our dear friend. There was a way through the sleight of hand of art for them to have, for us to feel there was a woven conversation between these voices that were so apart, separated from each other through the sleight of hand of art.
So a couple of questions have come in now. I do want to, so the first thing wasn't a question, but I am going to kind of, Holiday Day wrote just, I think, a couple of lines that she wanted to have read. So peace is the calm after the storm. The calm eases the mind and the soul of us all. Henry Williams asks, does your teaching of poetry include the classical poets, European, English, or American, or Latin American, for example?
Well, absolutely. What's unique and unusual about the Wick Poetry Center, we are now a center within the College of Arts and Sciences here at Kent State, and we exist alongside the English department, which offers literature classes, poetry classes. My staff and I will occasionally teach some of the creative writing classes, but we do not teach within the English department the literature classes, for example, 20th century American poets or world poetry. We do, however, are always looking for what we call model poems, or poems that we can bring to community settings or to our outreach to engage, to charge the air, to engage people in conversations, to connect with subjects and concerns in their own lives, and to lead them to responding in some way. So yes, we've used many classical poets, European, English, American, Latin American, the Pablo Neruda odes to common things are such rich poems for conversation and to prompt people in their own writing.
So our next question is from Donna Miller, who, this is an interesting one. Seniors, especially those living in special facilities, would benefit from exploring poetry. Any suggestions for involving them?
Well, absolutely. We've done a lot of work with senior adults, and I personally led a writing workshop at the Judson Manor Senior Living Facility in Cleveland for about 9 years, from around 2001 to around 2011. And we're going to have a really exciting event online April 30th, if that's a Thursday, Joshua. It's going to be Thursday at 4 o'clock. So I encourage folks to, if they're interested, it's going to be beautiful video poems made by Kent State videographers of the Judson Manor seniors' work. And there'll be several of them will be there for a Q&A. It's, we have events.travelingstanzas.com is where we don't have it up yet, but we'll have that up very soon as a registration link.
So just a comment from Henry Williams, who says, I know the Judson Manor. My aunt was there during this interface, small world possibly. And Joanne Bowden Ansley says, I'm very interested in learning more about writing my feelings about this virus. Please send info. I just want to let everyone know that, as is customary, we'll be sending an email, a follow-up email at the end of this presentation, where I'll be including the link for that David just put in, so that you can afterwards have that in your email and participate.
I accidentally sent it only to panelists. So I just sent it to attendees and panelists, and that's the website, globalvaccinepoem.com.
Yeah, and I will make sure to send that out to everyone after, as well as a link to the Global Peace Poem as well, if you haven't been able to submit now. I do think at this point that I'm not seeing any questions appear. So David, if you wanted to see if there were any submissions during our
I did. I just refreshed it. We have a submission from Lithuania, and I think it may be somebody attending our talk right now. And one from India. Are you able, Joshua? Do you know the names of these people? You know what we could ask, if somebody submitted to the Global Peace Poem, they could put a message in the chat.
Let's see if anyone jumps in. Not seeing any hands going up or anyone saying that they chimed in. Well, I think what I'll do now is invite, maybe someone will chime into the chat, but I'm going to invite our executive director of the ESU, who is also a poet, Karen Karpovich, in as well. Karen?
Hi, how are you? Thank you, David. That was very inspiring.
Thank you.
I loved your poem about your mother. That was a wonderful opening line. I also loved Abby, or is it Ellie? Ellie from Turkey?
Ellie Musavi, yeah, originally from Iran, and she was in a refugee for settlement for 3 years in Turkey.
Yeah, the ESU has our Andrew Ramey New Immigrant Center.
Mm.
And we have some amazing writers there also who are currently involved. We have a creative writing program. So it'd be wonderful if we could connect, because I think it would be a wonderful opportunity. I also want to thank you, Bill, for putting this together. I actually wanted to read, I was inspired to read, I want to read something of mine very quickly. And we were talking about voice and, why you write. And it is all I can do. It is how I touch. It is how I watch the broken clock. It is how I stand alone. It is how I near your room and see through the closed door. So I just wanted to add that to the experience.
That's beautiful. Karen, would you share that on there's a My Voice prompt, yeah, for the Global Peace Poem. That's beautiful.
So yes, I will do that. I was going to do that, but I felt like I wanted to share it with everyone today, because poetry is what I love more than anything else. So this was a great opportunity for me and for everyone else. Thank you again. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today. Our next event is April 7th, and it's Dr. Gideon Formuk, who is part of our Seattle branch. And it'll be a bit of a change. Well, not really, but it won't be a bit of a change. It's just another interpretation of words. And he's gonna talk about something called the basket of hope, finding success beyond setbacks. And this is going to be a personal journey of his. And please join us on April 7th in our next happy hour. And again, I want to thank our branches, because all of these programs are curated by our branches. And I also want to say to anyone who's not a member of the English Speaking Union to become a member, and you have that opportunity when you fill out the actual review form. and the evaluation of the event, there'll be an opportunity for you to become a member. And I encourage you all to do so. Thank you again. Bye-bye.